So, I've been thinking about democracy lately, the democratic process. And it's not surprising. I mean, you all know that this Sunday is our annual or biennial election Sunday. It's a long tradition in our faith in churches like ours. And often what we address at this time is a celebration of the democratic process. The church has a democratic process, both in its theology and in its governance, for thinking about all of the sorts of issues that a church thinks about, both practical ones like sprinkler systems and more heady ones like creeds and belief systems. And normally at this time, we lift that up and we're like, we're doing great. Democracy's great. Aren't we proud of ourselves? And in the church, we have a lot to be proud of. In the midst of this pandemic, we're still getting things done and we're still collaborating and we're still talking. But there's another democracy, right? The big one that we are part of here in this United States. And that one seems to have fallen on some hard times. There's not as much goodwill. There's not as much constructive conversation. And there's a lot of people who are just disengaged and are not participating because things have become so hard. And so today, so close to what may very well be the most important election of our lifetimes, although we say that, once a decade. Today, we need to think about our role in this democracy and pray for its future. So let's take a moment now in silence. Blessed be. Please join us now in the recitation of our covenant. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all. Now let us sing our song of exaltation.
Our prayer this morning is an excerpt from Psalm 94, an interpretation of the psalm written by Nan Merrill. O heart of pure fire, you who cleanse and refine us, compassionate one, shine forth. In your mercy, rise up and awaken those who still sleep in ignorance. O heart of all hearts, break open the hearts of your people, that we might hear and heed your word. When will the ignorant awaken? When I recognized my wrongdoings, your steadfast love renewed me, O compassionate one. The statutes of truth are certain, and the awakening a promise to be fulfilled. Who will be ready for the new dawn? Amen. And now would you please join me in reciting the prayer that Jesus taught to his disciples. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. When I entered the ICU, I felt as though I was walking on holy ground. Other than the beeping, buzzing, and ticking of machines, it was quiet. It was the surgical ICU, so my patients were in recovery from major procedures. Brains, backs, hearts. I had gentle conversations with them if they were awake, or sat silently beside family members while they watched their loved ones sleep. But there was something about the heart patients that I will never forget. The day after a major cardiac procedure, often the patient still had some tubes in their chest, which would have to be removed. So the surgical site was still open. As I sat beside them, what I saw, and I am no doctor, but what I saw covering their open chest looked like a bunch of cotton balls covered by a piece of saran wrap. All that there was between my patient's heart, their tender, beating, healing heart, and my own, was a wad of fuzz and a thin piece of plastic. And yet there they were, ready for a new dawn. Though it has been many months since I've stepped foot in a hospital, I have been thinking a lot lately about hearts. This vital organ, the size of our fist, that which keeps the physiological systems going that keep us alive, that which connects us emotionally and spiritually to the people we love the most, which breaks and heals and breaks again, and may be at times separated from the world by just a little bit of cotton and a little bit of plastic. O heart of all hearts, Nan Merrill writes as the psalmist, break open the hearts of your people. What an ask, right? Break open our hearts so that we might remember that where I end and you begin is in some ways a mystery. Break open our hearts so that we might remember that which separates us is so very thin, that we are connected, that we are all walking around with tender beating hearts, so exposed these days, so ready for a new dawn. I'm thinking about hearts because the more I pay attention, the more I understand that the very human institutions that are breaking our hearts cannot be where I ultimately put my faith. The seeds of healing, of liberation, and of love have never been and will never be found in the Supreme Court or the FDA or the Oval Office. They have been planted, tended, and nourished in the holy ground between my heart and yours, in the love that dwells and moves within and between us, that space where I end and you begin, where God resides. That space between my heart and yours is what moves me to work and speak and act on behalf of the most vulnerable members of the human family, on behalf of connection and communion. And so, yes, we vote. Through hell and high water, we vote. But we do not place our faith in the deeply broken human institutions in which we cast our ballots. We believe in democracy, but we do not entrust democratic institutions with our salvation. For we know that ultimately it is love, present in the connections between us, that space between my heart and yours, where we must put our faith. So though the protection may be thin, I will keep my heart open, and I will plant seeds of hope for the coming of a new dawn. May it be so.
So our reading today, or the reading I'm doing today, is from Aristotle's Politics. This particular selection has been pared down a bit and referred to as the virtue of the citizen. Like the sailor, the citizen is a member of a community. Now, sailors have different functions. For one of them is a rower, another is a pilot, and a third a lookout. A fourth is described by some similar term. And while the precise definition of each individual's virtue applies exclusively to them, there is at the same time a common definition applicable to them all. For they have, all of them, a common object, which is safety in navigation. Similarly, one citizen differs from another, but the salvation of the community is the common business of them all. It has been well said. It has been well said that the one who has never learned to obey cannot be a good commander. The two are not the same. But the good citizen ought to be capable of both and should know how to govern like a free person and how to obey like a free person. These are the virtues of a citizen. Now, when I was growing up, Election Day, and frequently the day after Election Day, actually, were essentially holidays for me. Election Day itself was taken up with door knocking and sign holding, and then the evening would be all about picking up signs that we left in people's yards and then spending the rest of it at a party in some hotel ballroom watching the returns. And for many of my friends, it was pretty much the same story because our parents were politicians. And every 2 years, we would discover whether the electorate, our neighbors and friends, along with many, many people we did not know, whether they felt that our parents had done a good job and therefore deserved to stay employed, or whether they had found our parents to be a bit wanting in either competence or ideology, in which case our parents would be unemployed, at least for a while. Now, we trusted, as kids, that people would, whether our candidates won or lost, that people would take the time to keep informed and make the effort to move the community, the state, and the nation in the direction that they wanted it to go. So it never occurred to me not to vote. It never once in my life occurred to me not to vote. And I still find it very strange when some folks remain disengaged from the electoral process. Because voting, to me, feels literally like the least we can do. The least that we can do. Even this year, with so much on the line, with real-world impact for every person on the planet, even this year, there will still be people who choose not to participate in democracy. People who cannot see the reason or the purpose of that participation. Now, I cannot get into all of the reasons for this phenomenon right now, but in short, there are those who do not see themselves represented, and there are others who can't be bothered. And sometimes, perhaps even most frequently, our government and its leaders go out of their way to convince people that they should fall into those first two categories, that voting shouldn't matter, or at least that their vote doesn't matter. And then there's this cultural problem we have as Americans. There's an odd American take on the meaning, not of the word democracy, but of a word that sometimes gets overlapped and confused with it, the word freedom. That idea of freedom, that American idea of freedom, you see, is sometimes used as a weapon against active participation in civil society. Because you are free not to participate. You are free not to vote. Aristotle talks about everyone in the body politic being part of the crew of a ship. The salvation of a community, he says, is in the common business of them all. But because of our relationship with this other idea of freedom and how we have chosen to define it as a nation, so many individuals have become comfortable being passengers on the ship instead of being part of the crew. Like I said before, they have that freedom. And working on the ship, being involved in civic life, that's messy business. And it is frustrating too. There are so many variables: winds, tides, storms, and other hazards. And there are crew members we probably don't like very much. In fact, there are crew members we definitely don't like very much. People we disagree with on issues, large and small. There are officers of varying levels of competence, honesty, and humility. And also, working on this ship of democracy, there are rules. There are rules, there are demands that are made of us to work together as a crew. And since this particular ship never stops moving, we don't get a break from the messiness, which is something that many of us crave. Now, Aristotle tells us that it has been well said that one who hasn't learned to obey cannot be a good commander. It has been well said that one who hasn't learned to obey cannot be a good commander. How much easier it is to be a passenger and never have to obey, yet criticize the staff, right up to the captain, about the rough weather or the direction we are going. How much easier than to take the step of accumulating responsibility for ourselves. How much easier than getting in there and grabbing a rope to turn the ship around. One of the great tensions in our civic life, and one that is rarely noticed or acknowledged in its entirety, is this tension between our obligations to each other on the one hand and our deeply ingrained sense of the importance of individualism on the other. This tension is a part of human life. We want to be free. We want to be free to live how we want to live, but at the same time, we are dependent on each other, no matter how much we wish we weren't. We are dependent on each other. Growing up around politicians and activists, as I did, we saw that dependence. And that dependence creates obligations, whether we choose to recognize them or not. Now, when democracy functions properly, we make progress, don't we? We make progress when the political weather is fine. And perhaps more importantly, when democracy functions properly, we survive the rough places wiser and stronger for the shared experience of the crew. Elected officials who know how to obey take their engaged constituencies seriously win or lose, and respect for our institutions, not the least of which is the institution of democracy itself, that respect remains strong. But when we fall asleep at the wheel, or when most of the crew remain disengaged, our democracy becomes weak. Our democracy becomes weaker. And so do we, even as individuals, though we may believe we are exercising that precious individuality. So how do we protect our democracy and the society we have struggled so hard to move forward toward that just commonwealth? On the words of Tara Humphries, we break open our hearts. We break open our hearts. Because in the end, what brings us from our separate rooms, what gets us from passenger to crew, isn't our love for ourselves, but our love for each other and love for something greater than the sum of its parts. Democracy is built into our faith, after all. I usually mention this around annual meeting time, so it should sound familiar. Democracy is built into our faith. In churches like ours, we are meant to open ourselves up and to share what we find in the process of personal and congregational discernment. A meeting of equals in an act of radical openness and caring. A meeting of equals in an act of radical openness and caring. And if that isn't the root of ideal democracy, I don't know what is. So now we will celebrate our communion at the open table, the table of equals before the divine. Now let us join in communion. May the spirit of prayer be on this house. Let us come together now to celebrate the story of Jesus, to connect to that story and to each other through the sharing of bread and wine. These simple things have been through the ages a sign of unity, a source of strength, and a witness to the power of sacrificial love. Now let us join together in silence for our private prayers of confession.
Now let us join in the responsive prayer. Your steadfast love, O God, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your judgments are like the great deep. You save humans and animals alike, O God. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light, we see light. Oh, continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your salvation to the upright of heart. Do not let the foot of the arrogant tread on me, or the hand of the wicked drive me away. Amen. And now a reading from the Gospel of Luke. When the day of the feast of the unleavened bread arrived, when the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, Jesus sent Peter and John out with the instructions, Go and make the preparations for us to eat the Passover." They asked, "Where do you want us to prepare this Seder?" Jesus answered, "When you enter the city, a man will meet you carrying a jar of water. Follow him into the house he enters. Say to the owner of the house, 'The rabbi asks, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover Seder with my disciples?' The owner will show you a large, furnished upper room. Make the preparations there." And they went out and found everything as Jesus had told them, and they prepared the Passover. When the hour had come, Jesus took a place at the table with the apostles. Jesus said to them, "I've longed to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I tell you, I will not eat it again until everything is fulfilled in the reign of God." Then, taking a cup of wine, Jesus gave thanks and said, "Take this and share it among you. I tell you, I will not drink wine from now on until the reign of God comes."
Then he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Eat this bread in remembrance of Jesus and of those who have been near and dear to us. And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. So drink this wine in remembrance of Jesus and of those who have been near and dear to us." And now, once again, let us hear from Psalm 94 by Nan Merrill. "The statutes of truth are certain, and the awakening a promise to be fulfilled. Who will be ready for the new dawn? Amen." Here's how the chorus goes. Hurrah, hurrah, we'll bring the Jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, for women shall be free, and have as many sacred rights as God gave you and me, while we are marching together. All right, everybody. Hurrah, hurrah, we bring the Jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, for women shall be free. Thanks, everybody. Sit down. Our benediction today is these words from St. Francis of Assisi. Where hate rules, let us bring love. Where sorrow, joy. Let us strive more to comfort others than to be comforted, to understand others than to be understood, to love others more than to be loved. For it is in giving that we receive, and in pardoning that we are pardoned. Amen. Blessed be. This concludes our service. I look forward to seeing some of you in coffee hour. And for everyone else, have a lovely Sabbath day.